All right, so for today's video, we're going to be doing some value scales using the different shading techniques. So as you can see here, I've got 5 rows. Each row has 5 boxes in it. We're going to create what's called a value scale or a gradient from dark to light. Each one is, again, a different shading technique. So we're going to start with hatching. Hatching is where you create values using a series of parallel lines. And as you know, parallel lines don't intersect. The trick to create your value here is the closer together your marks are, the darker the value, and the farther apart they are, the lighter the value. So I've just finished that first box. I'm spreading my lines just slightly farther apart here, so there's just a lighter value. You don't want to go too much space between your lines too quickly, because then you're going to run out of values to put in for your boxes. All right, and there's hatching. So that's all, again, straight lines. They don't have to be diagonal. They can go in any direction as long as they're parallel. So cross hatching, you've got the word hatching here, so we know we're using lines. This time you're using 2 sets because they have to cross here. So I'm just going to fill this box here with 2 different kinds of lines. And if you hear that, that's just my dog playing with his brother cat there. Sorry, there was some noise. All right, so I just finished doing this. Now I'm gonna add another series of hatched lines that are crossing those lines to create the cross hatching. You'll notice as you go, the textures change. So this, the hatching looks kind of like metal almost, and cross hatching looks almost like weaving of some sort. All right, so then we're just going to keep filling this in. And again, keep your, as you're lightening up your values, you just keep your lines moving farther and farther apart. So that last box is gonna have very few lines in it. All right, so again, you should have 5 distinct values when you're finished, just like the one before. Stippling is where you're using dots to show your value. Same method applies. You want to put your dots close together, and we want dots, not spots. All right, so for stippling, we don't want this. That's not what we want. That's a spot. We want a dot. All right, so you're going to put these together as close together as you can to create that dark value. All right, so there's my first value. It does take a minute. So as you go, just start to spread those out to get them nice and light. I will say stippling is probably the best way for ink to create a very gradual change in value, almost like blending, but ink doesn't really blend that well unless you're using like different values of ink. It doesn't lighten on its own. So you kind of have to force that to happen, either using one of these shading techniques or using like shading markers or shading pens. All right, and a lot of people would want to stop here, but there's too much of a difference between these 2 values. This value, the second value here, got too light too quickly. So I'm gonna add some more dots just to kind of fill in some of these white spaces so that my value starts to get darker. All right, so now I'm ready to move on. This is more of a gradual step between values. All right, so now that I'm done with stippling, I've got 5 different values going from dark to light. Next, we're gonna do scumbling, and scumbling is just a fancy word for scribbling. So again, same concept applies as the top 3 value scales, except this time you're gonna scribble. You wanna keep your lines kind of loose and curvy. Don't make them too uniform because it's gonna look too much like hatching. And then it's not gonna come out to the right texture. So when you're stippling, your texture ends up looking kind of porous. When you're scumbling, it looks almost fluffy. So remember, keep your marks loose and then spread them far apart to get those different values. All right, so for the last shading technique, the last value scale we're gonna use our shading pencils. And I don't have the same shading pencils we have in the classroom. If you want to know what the classroom pencils are and in order from dark to light, that is available on Schoology in our notes, in our value, texture, and form notes. However, I do have a set of shading pencils on my own. What you need to know is that each pencil has a different letter and a number. So right here it says 6B. B means soft, which means the lead itself is soft. You're gonna get a dark mark and it's gonna smudge. So the higher the number next to the letter, the darker or lighter it's gonna be. And so H means hard. So hard lead means that it's not going to make a light mark, or it's not gonna make a dark mark, so it'll make a light mark. It will make a light mark. The mark's gonna be kind of thin and it's not gonna smudge at all. All right, so again, we wanna start with a dark pencil and move our way to our light pencils. And again, you only need 5 for this. You're gonna fill each box with a shading pencil, with 1 shading pencil, and then underneath it, you're going to label what shading pencil you used. All right, so I'm starting with a 6B, and I'm just gonna fill this whole box in. Don't press too hard, kind of keep an even pressure. It's the best way to show what each pencil does. And you just want a nice even coating of that pencil in each box. All right, so this was 6B. Remember, don't forget to label when you're finished shading in a box. Next one I'm going to use is 4B. Again, keep that pressure even. Don't press too hard or too lightly. Just try to keep a nice even pressure. My next pencil is 2B. My next pencil is B. My last pencil is HB. All right, so this is the finished value worksheet. There is a printable worksheet if you want to use that. Don't forget to add the definition of value, which is of course the lightness or darkness of a form or object, but this itself was the demonstration that we did in class.